Hello everyone, my name is Michael Pearl. I'm the Director of Content at Finance Magnets. Just in a nutshell, Finance Magnets is a media group focusing on online trading, mostly crypto and Forex. We've been covering crypto since 2013, quite early on. So we'll just dive into the panel and I'll let the panelists introduce themselves. So everyone just take 1 minute to state who you are and a little bit about your company. So Josh, please.
My name is Josh Goodbody. I am the head of Europe in the Americas for Webby Global. Webby Global, as you may or may not know, I hope you know, is one of the largest, oldest digital asset financial services providers globally. We do quite a lot. We do spot exchange, futures exchanges, OTC business. We have 3 venture capital businesses. So we really see ourselves as a full-service digital services group. So really where I come in is I look after the European and the Americas region. I've got a particular focus on all things institutional, hence the relevance of the panel. And I'll share that in a little bit more detail as we walk through the questions.
I'm Kristen Mirabella, Business Development at Gemini. Traditional background in finance. Working at Gemini, we're focused on 2 very specific things. We have an exchange where you can buy, sell, and trade crypto, of course. We also have a qualified custodian, which we've relaunched as of last Tuesday. It's pretty straightforward, so I'll stop there and go into it more.
So Tom Shaughnessy, I'm a co-founder at Delphi Digital. We're focused on institutional crypto research. So think of sell side for crypto. So we do token reports all the way up to macro outlooks and weekly commentaries. Then the other half of our business, we work with projects and crypto funds on research and analysis.
Thank you, guys. So let's start with a warm-up question, and it will be quite a basic one, but it's important to clarify it. So when you say institutional clients, what do you mean? Is it a matter of volume versus, is it a quantity or versus quality type of question? Or is it supposed to be like an institutional body in the traditional definition of things? So, Josh?
Yeah, I think from our side, we look at it from a bit of a multifaceted viewpoint. So we tend to see anything that is a corporate as eligible to be serviced by an institutional business. So just to set a little bit of the scene, we have a dedicated institutional team that only looks after these client segments. So that's a front office team, a middle office team, and also a back office and tech support team. So any client that's a corporate is eligible to be supported. And of course, within that, that's a huge range of different counterparties that we could include in there. You know, there are hedge funds, there are prop shops, there are very small asset managers. Of course, we'd love to say there are sovereign wealth funds in that, but they're coming down the road a little bit later. So there's a real diversity in terms of what we refer to as institutional. It really is anything that's a corporate, anything that requires a almost enterprise-like service approach to their trading, giving them different bespoke ad hoc products. So we look at it on a case-by-case basis, but we do have a box that we believe most of the applicable customers would fit in nicely.
We think about it similarly, slightly different in that it doesn't have to be a corporate necessarily, but we do look at the type of trading a client would be engaged in. So if it is at the institutional level, maybe they need fixed connection, maybe they're trading via API, maybe they're using our active trader platform. Those have been designed and cater specifically to a very traditionally focused or institutionally focused group of traders. When we look at how we would designate our coverage, though, it can include ultra high net worth individuals as well. So I do think that there is a certain amount of dollars being traded that comes into account, but certainly the venue they're trading on, and all of that does come with a very hands-on institutional group that is either available 24 hours for connectivity purposes or someone on my team working specifically with account arrangement and helping them find other ways to service their business.
Yeah, kind of echoing the same thoughts here. So we have 2 different products on the recurring side. One is strictly institutional, so that includes, so we focus on research and analysis. So that's way more extensive, deep dive token models and economic models and research surrounding tokens that really is specifically catered for crypto funds and banks and firms, because it's either too much information for retail to digest, or it might be too sophisticated, or it might be too hard to access unless you have a specialized fund type team. On the consulting side, it's mostly crypto funds and banks and firms. It's definitely more qualitative, definitely early innings. We're not seeing any sovereign wealth funds yet. I definitely agree they're coming. but the focus earlier on is definitely on crypto funds and then more exotic, type firms.
Thank you. So let me ask you, Tom. You know, there's kind of a hypothesis that says that despite the crypto hype that we're all in, and obviously all of us are speaking from a position in this matter, there is not much involvement of institutional bodies in the crypto trading and not much of an investment. It's basically on the fringes. So you, as a person that is examining this thoroughly and you have the numbers in front of you, what would you say? Is it a right claim to state?
Yeah, I think it's a good question. I think there's two different ways to look at this. There's so much going on in crypto every day that it's hard to zoom out and realize how much progress we've actually made. Most of the time, you could take a week off, and if you really look at it, not much has actually happened in the last week, right? But it's just so much specific stuff going on, it feels like it's moving 1,000 miles an hour. On the institutional front, I think that there is adoption. So you could see banks entering, like JP Morgan with JPM Coin, all the way up to Fidelity and new custodians that are entering the space. So I definitely think institutional adoption is accelerating for sure.
I would piggyback off of that and saying that there are certain types of products that will continue to come to market, as you've mentioned, that will make it easier for institutions to adopt crypto. So if you look at our custody business, we are registered as a New York trust company by the New York Department State of Financial Services. So when we look at operating under a trust license, we can do several things. As a qualified custodian, we can cater to certain types of hedge funds and other types of trading shops who have to act as a fiduciary. And if they're also required to keep their customers' assets segregated from, say, a commingled pool, which is how our hot wallet and our exchange side operates, then they're going to look to a platform that operates in such a way. We've also embedded certain functionalities such as trading instant liquidity out of their complete cold balance in cold storage. We also offer sub-accounting. In addition to that, looking at offering clearing and settlement platforms for institutions trading OTC style. These are all things that we're putting into place by demand of our clients that will continue to make it easy for them to approach as they're familiar with trading this way in traditional marketplaces. So we'll continue to put that forward, and I think that will also increase the focus.
So, Josh, just to focus the question and following Kristen's reply, just to single out one or two features that you would present or you're already presenting as an exchange to institutional clients to attract them and to target them.
Yeah, good question. I think just to echo the general sentiment, we're seeing a real influx of what I'd say high quality institutional clients coming into the market. They may be dipping their toe in, they may not be allocating significant percentage of their book, but nonetheless they are trading actively on these markets. So we identified about a year and a half ago the need to have a dedicated institutional team just to serve that client segment. So we've been building that out for about a year and a half. One of the key things that we identified was technology. So retail technology or retail adequate technology is extremely different to the kind of grade technology that institutions want to see. So we made a big change from a technology perspective to provide people the connectivity that they expect to see. So that means robust APIs that can accommodate high-frequency trading, a multiple suite of different access points that would give the right data, give the right kind of order endpoints. That really was key for our clients to start being comfortable trading with us. That was one thing. And then a second thing was just really the breadth of products we were offering. They wanted to see a number of liquid markets that were transparent and operated in the right way. They wanted to understand the market data that we were producing. They wanted access to level 1 data, level 2 data. So with technology comes transparency, and we tried to put those two together as we've built out the institutional offering.
Okay. So following up to another facet of the institutional offering is obviously regulations. So we have two types of regulated exchanges here, regulated and less regulated. I would like to ask both of you, and then we'll move on to you. What type of regulation does an exchange need to have in order to attract institutional clients? And what is the difference between the different jurisdictions? Because the two different companies are regulated in different places and under different types of regulations. So please.
As I mentioned a moment ago, Gemini is regulated by the New York Department of Financial Services as a trust company, and that's hard work. I think if looking at the United States, as the backdrop, New York is one of the most difficult places to be regulated and operate. You can also be regulated by certain entities in South Dakota, for example, but being regulated in the way that we've chosen to from the very beginning, we've been able to make doing things the right way from our perspective the cornerstone of how we run our business, and it's allowed us to employ certain techniques, whether it's security, whether it's what markets we open to, what type of products we allow for trading. We know that adoption can continue in this way where we're asking for permission and not forgiveness so that we continue to be a top choice for institutions that do need to operate in a very regulated marketplace. I'd love, go ahead.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right in the US, and we as Huobi, we made a move into the US about 18 months ago now, and we did a full analysis of the landscape, and for institutions to come and trade on our market, you have to be regulated at the highest standard. You have to really have that seal of approval for them to trust you with their money. So we went down a similar path and went down the money service business route. That is, as you said, extremely difficult. It takes a long time. Working with the regulators is, I wouldn't say painful, but it is confusing and trying sometimes because there's so much demand on their side, and it's a relatively new space. So we very quickly identified the need to do that in the US as well. But I guess maybe stepping back, Huobi Global itself originally started off in 2013 as an unregulated exchange. And really back then, there were absolutely no regulatory frameworks that we could sit within. So we, over the years, have identified regulatory regimes that we think are fit for purpose. So, as an example, we purchased BitTrade in Japan, which is one of the licensed exchanges in Japan. We helped set up a self-regulatory organization in Korea, so we are self-regulated in Korea. Our MENA team have done a fantastic job at setting up an ADGM license in principle, so they'll very soon be able to do the full suite of crypto business. As I mentioned, we've got an MSB in the US that allows us to do electronic money transfer, and we've also got a regulated DLT license entity in Gibraltar, and that's a kind of a global footprint for us that we see as really important to attract and give comfort to the institutions. So it's just the start, but we think it's a solid base to work off.
Following up on that, in the pre-panel discussions that we had, you mentioned Gibraltar as a case study, as a use case for a small custom-made jurisdiction. Can you explain a little bit more about that, and what are the advantages and disadvantages of Gibraltar in specific, but also in general about such jurisdictions?
Yeah, absolutely. We went around the world looking at different jurisdictions to find a test case for a regulated venue that was within a new licensing system. And we found Japan, we found Korea, and in Europe we found Gibraltar. We also looked at Malta, we looked at various other jurisdictions. The reason we picked Gibraltar was that they had built a very comprehensive, well thought out, well scoped regulatory regime. It made sense. It incorporated all the elements of crypto business that we wanted to see, which was crypto to crypto, fiat to crypto, custody of digital assets, and OTC business. That all fits nicely within one box. And that regime gives the local service providers, the banks, the auditors, the comfort with which they need to engage with us as a crypto company. So we thought that that was a really comprehensive example of a new regulatory framework, and it doesn't step on the toes of any of the existing financial markets regulation, which we've seen other regulators do when building their crypto-specific models. And that causes confusion, that causes regulatory arbitrage, and that's a messy place to be in. So we thought that was a very clean and simple way to have a pretty comprehensive business, nicely regulated within a well thought out regulatory regime.
But if I may step in, what I think is really neat about the efforts you're making to operate in a regulated marketplace and the efforts we've made is that it continues to build trust. And I think that that is one of the main components of what's going to continue to push adoption. We've maintained that trust is our product, and we're very proud of it. And I think we're building it by doing things every single day the right way. And we're okay being slow and announcing new products. We're okay being, the tortoise in that race. But
the fastest tortoise in the race.
The fastest tortoise. That's exactly right. And I think that you'll continue to see this, globally, as you've mentioned. So it's only appreciated across the ecosystem when other exchanges are also doing the right thing for their clients.
So we cannot talk about the institutional adoption without mentioning something that is considered to be the silver bullet solution, which is Bitcoin ETFs. So Tom, I wanted to ask you, is it really what we expect it to be? I mean, once it's approved, does it really gonna cause mass adoption and will be that kind of a turnkey solution that is going to introduce crypto to the institutional world?
Yeah, it's a good question. I'm sure my fellow panelists have probably more specific commentary here than I do, but what I would say is that we've been tracking different Bitcoin ETFs for years now. There's been multiple different ones proposed. Basically, the can's being kicked down the road. There's a recent one that's approved to accredited or institutional investors through an exemption, but that obviously hasn't seen any real AUM uptake. I think 3 days in, there was only 40 or 50K in there. So there's not really mass adoption there that people would like to think. But the point is that that's institutional. I think what you're talking about is when do we get a Bitcoin ETF that people can buy and sell in their brokerage account, and what will that impact be? In my opinion, the impact is huge because you have something that funds and individuals and retail investors can easily allocate to. And if you just look at what inflows would do, considering crypto's market cap is so small and how large the existing ETF market is, the inflows can have a pretty dramatic impact on the price of certain cryptos. The other thing to keep in mind is that a lot of these cryptos are very illiquid. So 5, 10, 20 billion in inflows really moves the needle, and it would actually be pretty hard to purchase that level, but maybe not on a great exchange like you guys.
So following up on that, Gemini has been knocking on the Bitcoin ETF doors, and without much success until now. But can you tell us a little bit about the process and why are you trying so hard?
So we actually don't have an application filed at the moment, but I do think that it will be critical for increased adoption, not just for institutions, but for retail investors. My background was in the third-party distribution of traditional assets and traditional funds, like a mutual fund, and to have the ability to click a button and invest in something like crypto that's been so difficult to understand, that seems kind of like a black box, and do I have the money to really buy, 10 Bitcoin? Maybe someone doesn't, but they definitely have the ability to invest in ETF. So while we don't have an application, right now, we would love to see one be present because I think that, again, it only continues to strengthen the ecosystem. But outside of that, I think that there are other things. I don't think that there's going to be one silver bullet necessarily. I think that continuing to build trust, continuing to offer products like settlement and like, other custody options will all collectively, add to that.
Yeah, same on my side. I think it's not a magic bullet by any means. It is very important, I think, in terms of showing slow but steady progress in introducing these institutional products into the market. There is enormous value in an ETF, or especially the retail space, but it's going to be a long game because essentially when the ETF is approved, it's like almost validating the Bitcoin market. And when that happens, that's when it gets really exciting. The secondary effects of the ETF being approved, I think, are the really exciting things because the wealth products that are going to be created off the back of that will be quite exciting.
So following up on that, you mentioned the exemption, the ETF by exemption. We're obviously talking about the VanEck case. What do you think about that? Is it kind of a detour around the regulator? Is it effective?
Yeah, I mean, definitely not a lawyer here, so I would just voice my opinion that I think it's a great, milestone. I think the adoption has been lackluster. I honestly expected it to be a lot more, but I think the point is that it's not hard for a fund or firm or crypto fund to open up a Coinbase account and buy Bitcoin, so why are we even paying a management fee to own this? There's really no point. That is also echoed to a lot of funds that exist in the space today, and that's why a lot of funds are moving to do more quant strategies and more VC strategies and things where there's value add beyond just holding Bitcoin or Ethereum. But to your earlier question, I do think it's a good milestone, definitely on the way, but it's not a consumer ETF by any means.
Just so both of you mentioned custody. What kind of a custodial service do institutional clients need these days, and what does the future hold in that regard?
Yeah, I think for us as an exchange, we're all conscious of the inherent risks of holding assets on exchanges. That concentration risk is something that any rational person would find worrying, and institutions have a very low risk threshold. So this is something that we as an exchange are actively trying to problem solve by speaking to some of the custody providers out there. we have a working group looking towards building a custody solution. I can't really talk about what that'll look like yet, but it will be very similar to things that are out there in the market. But I think there's naturally a place for working with third parties because clients want a diversification of their risk profile, and you cannot provide that with an all-in-one shop. So we're really looking to, I suppose, establish partnerships with the right people. So when the time comes that a majority of high-value institutional clients come to us and say, we want to work with third-party custodians, we're ready to do that, and we have a roster of well-known, trusted third parties that we can delegate that activity to.
I know of a good one.
Yeah, maybe me too.
Jim and I thinks about custody in two different ways, and it's how we basically segment how we look at our business. One is on the exchange side, where liquidity is managed with a large component of assets being held in cold storage, very small percentage in hot. But then on the custody side of things, we create specific and unique addresses for assets to be held. And the private keys associated with these addresses are held on hardware security modules that are kept in air-gapped, access-guarded facilities that are geographically dispersed throughout the United States. We've adapted a security system that I believe is best in class, and it's important that institutions have realized the difference in how the security measures matter in this sense, because while they're segregated and while that checks the box of how they're supposed to act as fiduciaries, the fact that we're also qualified custodian regulated by the DFS, all of these things stack up in a way that make them comfortable with putting all of their clients' assets or a portion of their clients' assets with us, and now the ability to instantly trade out of that balance where you're not waiting for a 24-hour SLA to kick in. That's been a huge difference. So not compromising one bit of the security associated with our platform, now you can trade on that, and I think that's been extremely impactful.
So Libra is expected to have a very large impact on the retail sphere. Obviously, with 2 billion retail users will have access to crypto, this will be something that we cannot even imagine. But my question is, how will it impact, if any, the institutional sphere? If tomorrow morning Libra will be a household asset, what will we see in the institutional sphere? Tom, maybe we'll start with you.
Yeah, so we have a report out on Libra, and we have mixed reviews on the impact and what it means for the space. At a high level, we think it could be a huge educational on-ramp for the space. So what is Facebook's Libra? How do I use it? How does this compare to Bitcoin and Ethereum? What are the differences? I think that's a really big educational on-ramp. As for its impact on crypto, I think that's to be seen, because it's really unsure of how Calibra, the wallet, and Libra will actually interact with the crypto sphere. Like, can I trade it on Huobi, or like, can I actually custody this? Where do I hold it? Where do I transfer it? That's all tough. The other thing is the regulations around it. So, countries are coming out already banning something that's not live yet. And it's also not a crypto. It's very different. It's not a permissionless, immutable network. It's something that's led by a foundation, a group of centralized validators, and it's not a free programming language where we can build unstoppable applications on. So it's a great on-ramp, but I think it's far from a crypto.
Kristen, and following up on this, just to focus the question, do you have anything to share with us about your thoughts on Libra as an exchange?
I think we've been very public about the fact that we support anything that's going to increase adoption and increase, at least knowledge about, crypto globally, right? There are a lot of good things that we think that platform could do. So should they be able to overcome some of the hurdles that they've been, confronted with in recent past? Sure, I think that any reason to support a good coin that's going to be used on a wider basis, we'd be happy to see it succeed. So if it needs to be custodied, if it needs to be traded, I think that's further down the road, but we think it's really interesting and would be good.
So you want to follow up on that, Josh?
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think anything that increases adoption is a good thing. It may not be the product we all think it will be. It may not revolutionize the peer-to-peer retail space. It's certainly going to increase a huge amount of interest in the space, and I think that is enormously valuable. When people that have never uttered the word Bitcoin before in a casual conversation at lunch start talking about it, and they go, "Oh, Libra, what's Libra? And how does this interact with Bitcoin?" That's a good thing. We need more of that. So, What their product will look like, I simply don't know. It will have an effect on the market, I believe a positive one. But what it certainly has done is ignited a debate. And that debate is extremely helpful for all of us because we're still very much in an education phase. We're telling people about the products we're building. We're telling them about the potential. And the more that we get to do that, the better.
So following up on that, there's been a very vast hype of. We're out of time.
She said that the name of questions.
Okay.
Question shortly.
So yeah, so let's open the floor for questions. Any questions from the audience? Daniel.
I'm interested on the regulation side. So you guys picked Gibraltar, as you mentioned. You went with an MSP license in the U.S. You already have as you said, the New York State. What I'm curious is the institutional companies or asset managers, is that a good enough license for them? Because what I understand, a lot of the asset managers, those are still not good enough for them to be able to trade on your exchange. They need like an MTF license in Europe, or they need a CFTC license, something like this. I'm just kind of curious, is there business actually on that under those regulations?
For Gemini's, business being regulated in the United States by the New York Department of Financial Services as a trust company is actually the more stringent and highest level of regulation that we'd been able to achieve. And it took a long time and it was a lot of hard work. So our institutional customers trading in the U.S., it is very much, it's good enough. Same for the custody. Looking abroad, I do know that there are some hurdles associated with it, but we continue to explore it, and as we grow and continue to suss out which other jurisdictions that makes most sense in, we'll do the equivalent, or if not more stringent.
Yeah, we've got a broad regulated footprint. So, for example, in Japan, the licensing regime that we have there is tantamount to a financial institution licensing regime. So all Japanese institutions can interact and willingly interact with that exchange. It's a good question whether a similar institution would be comfortable interacting with, for example, a Gibraltar regulated entity. Thus far, we haven't had any problems. I think there's a natural point where we will start to have to justify ourselves and maybe broaden out the scope of those regulations. But so far, the adoption's been pretty solid. And actually, there's a bit of a counterpoint here. What I found interesting, and my background's very much in traditional finance. I've been a lawyer in financial markets for the last 10 years, JP, Credit Suisse. So I've got very much a traditional finance hat on quite a lot of the time, and it takes some time taking it off. So even that Huobi Global is an unregulated exchange, even though that's a fact, which is our original liquidity pool, just for your knowledge, even though that's unregulated, we still have some of the largest caliber institutional clients trading on there. So what I do find very interesting in the space, and people don't always talk about it enough, is there's a real difference in risk appetite in institutions. In prop shops, in hedge funds, you tend to see a high risk attitude. Whereas, of course, the further you go down towards entities that have fiduciary duties, of course, it's much more complicated. So there's a real palette of different approaches out there. And there's certainly no one quick fix for all of that.
You just reminded me of something which I think goes for any way you're regulated, and if you're doing it at the highest standard, which the DFS for one requires, is that you are going through the KYC AML processes that are required. Being regulated by the DFS as a trust means that we're also held to the same banking standards that any regular financial institution would. So, same, like I said, KYC, AML, margin, etc. It's all the same.
We have one more question. Please.
I have a quick question for Josh and one for Kirsten. For Josh, I just wanted to ask, you set up shop in Gibraltar, and I was just wondering the comparison between Gibraltar and Switzerland in terms of their regulatory setup. So that's a question. And then for Kristen, just in terms of if the ETF does come through, would it be based only on Bitcoin initially, or would it be a package of multiple cryptocurrencies?
Unfortunately, I don't have an answer at the moment. Since we haven't filed, I think we'd have to get to the point where we were further down that road with something more developed before we'd be able to nail something like that down. We can keep you posted, though.
So that's a really good question about Gibraltar. So we did look at Switzerland, and we think a lot of what Switzerland have done is very impressive. The FINMA rules, all of the guidance notes they've published have been super helpful. But actually, Gibraltar got there first, and they got there about the same time that we wanted to build a business. So, I'm certainly of the opinion that Switzerland is somewhere we could do business. That there may even be a use case at some point in the future. They have very commonsensical custody regimes that apply to digital assets. So that's one real pro that's on their side. But Gibraltar got there first. We took a real in-depth approach with the government. The government actually came to meet our leadership team in China as well. They came to Singapore with us, and so we got to know them very well, and we bought into the entire project. And we've been part of the discussion they've been having in building out their regulatory regime. So, we were quite ingrained in that process, and that's why we ended up going that way. But that's not to say that Switzerland is deficient in any kind. I think there's certainly some very, very interesting business cases that we have that may very well fit in the Swiss regime.
So I think we're out of time. Thank you guys so much for the vibrant talk, and thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you very much.